look who we have to start. One of the great historians and a poet, and we're very excited. So thank you for joining us. Before I get into our hostess introducing Mr. Dunn and his story about Mr. Crosby, if you don't mind, bear with me with a little housework. We are very much the guests of the Manchester by the Sea Library, and Maddie, who is the wizard who finds ways to take cobwebs out of the air and spin us into here. We do not have a center of our own, and Maddie makes us feel very much at home every possible way. So I thank her, and anytime you see her in the library, I hope you'll extend your thing. Oh, you're so cute. You'll extend the same congratulations. So thank you so much. Yay, Maddie. Additionally, tonight is our, as you know, our speaker, but we have some additional things coming up. We, through the great graciousness of a local vendor, Jay McLaughlin, has decided to host us next Thursday night from 4 to 6 as a meet and greet, so that you'll get, come on in, so you'll get to know us a little better in a more relaxed atmosphere, and hopefully buy some clothing from Jay McLaughlin. I know I'm not supposed to plug, but I have to. Buy some clothing, maybe a little holiday shopping, and 15% of their proceeds will be donated to the Cultural Council. We are a small council. No one ever has heard of us, so we're in startup mode, which leads me to explain what we do. We are mandated by the state and by the Council on Aging, by the National Endowment of the Arts, to look for programs that are of excellence and to fund them. Our budget is small. However, we do look for programs of excellence, and we fund what we can around town. Many of the things are familiar to you. One of them, it will start on October 1st. Come on in, hi. October 1st, Maddie has a blues musician that plans to rock crawl chapel. So if you could put that on your calendar, we would love to see you there. We funded things of that nature. We fund things for schools and our elderly and our littlest children. One of the other things, or I guess a little more housekeeping if you don't mind, other guests next month will be Catherine Howe. She is a co-author with Anderson Cooper, who you may have heard of. Anderson and she have written many books. He is of the Vanderbilt family. They started there and continued on with Astor. And yesterday, Astor was re-released in paperback form, making it more affordable. So if you see that, pick it up, and Catherine will be speaking here October 10th. After that, we have the original brick house, Cindy Stumpo, coming. And yes, she's as fresh as it seems. She is the woman that was told she wouldn't be able to do anything in life, and she has become a contractor, and she has become the go-to gal in Chestnut Hill. She's built her neighbor's house. Over here is Tom Brady, formerly Tom Brady, and he's still Tom Brady, but he used to live next door. And over here is Bob Kraft. So she's built rows and rows and rows of homes in Chestnut Hill, and what she wants to make sure you know is that she was told that she could never succeed, and yet she has. So she is a person that has had her own television show on House and Garden TV, and she does a radio show, Tough as Nails, as well. So she will be here. Try not to be offended. Yes, she does F-bomb, but we love her anyway. She's fresh and she's refreshing because she encourages all of us, irrespective of our challenge, to keep going. So I think that's it for housekeeping. We've got the Jay McLaughlin, we have the rock and roll concert from the library, and we have our guests coming.
The museum?
The museum. Tell me.
Him?
Oh, in next year, in 2025. Thank you, I like that. Let's keep going. In 2025, we're going to have Petra Slinkard, who is the director of fashion and art at the Peabody Essex Museum, and she is a whirlwind of information. She's not only a historian, but she's a curator of fashionable clothes, and she will explain the history of fashion as it has informed our culture and as we continue to evolve in our various style of clothing. Petra has the overview that goes beyond today's fashions, but it reaches back into the chronicles of colonial times, and certainly we have a great deal of information here, and she's going to share it. She's a powerhouse as well, and so we'll look forward to that in 2025, if you can believe that. So I think, have we got everything? Then it's my pleasure to introduce you to one of our council members, our friend, Dr. Christine Moncombe. Christine speaks for herself in terms of her wizardry, but she is kindly, with Marion Powers, joining the Cultural Council to connect with all of you in new ways. If you will tell us what you would like, we will try to meet you where you are, because that's the mission of the Cultural Council. And with our budget and our mission statement from the Endowment of the Arts, our definition of art can be quite grand and quite broad. So if I may, I'd like to introduce Dr. Moncombe, and she will introduce the guest of the evening, Mr. Dunn. Come on up, sister.
Okay.
Go, go.
Well, thank you, Diane. My name is actually Chris Moncombe, and it's a delight to welcome you all to this, I think, historic event tonight. And I'm going to introduce our speaker, Jim Dunn. This began last spring when he contacted me after noticing that some kind of Cultural Council speaker series was being discussed on Facebook. And he had an idea for a talk, and a talk that he could actually give, and one that had a Manchester hook. He then proceeded to tell me about some chap named Harry Crosby, who had some kind of literary legacy and liberty and lifestyle. And yes, he had spent his youthful summers in Manchester, but I had never heard of Harry Crosby. So I did some due diligence, which meant to Wikipedia. Well, was I ever surprised? Somebody has a Wikipedia page which is so fascinating, filled with world-renowned authors and artists, and much of it takes place in Paris. I realized this was a life of distinction and one that we should know about. So thus, Jim and Harry were booked for tonight. I also learned that Jim might be the ideal raconteur to give this talk. He is a poet, an author, a longtime scholar of Harry Crosby. He has a very good standing in the local literary community. He's a frequent voice on the circuit. I'm aware of this year you being on the stage at the Cut, at the Manship Artist Residency, at Gloucester Writers Center, and you were an invited contributor to the inaugural publication of The Illegalist, a new literary publication put out by the people at Dogtown Books. So I think we have a wonderful subject ahead of us, and the ideal person to tell the story. And so with no further ado, I will turn the evening over to Jim, who will bring Harry Crosby back to life here in this town, which I've learned Harry truly adored in his youth.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, it's interesting that Harry really stratifies people. So there's people here that are very, very knowledgeable, that really know a lot about Harry, and there's people who don't know anything about Harry. And it reminds me of Kerouac in Lowell, like in the 70s, where somebody with such literary pedigree was assumed to be one way and forgotten by his town. Not that Manchester's forgotten Harry, but he's a secret. And you know, the black sun is a circle, and he's a mystery. And so I don't know if I can bring him back to life, but I want to share some of the stuff I know. Hopefully I'll hit on everything, but an amazing poet, amazing publisher, amazing in many different ways. He was also an ambulance driver in World War I, but we'll get into all that. So the lost son of the lost generation, from Manchester to Paris to the sun. Harry was born in Boston, in Back Bay, and he was born, let me talk about what we're going to do. So I'll introduce Harry and his life in Boston and Manchester, which is very important to him. Then his early life, World War I service, and his brush with death, as meeting Caresse. And one thing that I failed to highlight here, but I will in the talk, is Harry could have done none of what he did in the short time that he was able to write the diaries, to write the poems, and publish amazing books in beautiful, beautiful editions without Caresse. And I'll talk a lot about her and the relationship and the scandal and his hatred of Boston and his love of Manchester. And we were talking earlier, he may even have been in this chapel, even though he probably didn't like churches, but I'm sure he could have been here. So it's really amazing. And interesting thing might pop up. We have the owner of the Apple Tree Estate here today, which is amazing, and former owner may be here later on, so it's crazy. So, yeah. Okay, someone has a white Volvo blocking someone's driveway. It's Caleb. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, good. Cheer. I'll have a blue Christmas without you. Is that better? Sibilance. All right. A little better? Do we just talk like this? All right.
Try it again.
All right. Thanks, Fred. Oh, is that better? Am I clear? All right, I'll try without, and then I'll try within, if you can't hear me.
I think the question is if they
Can you guys hear me in the back? You got my mic right? Gabe, can you hear me? Gabe. So anyway, we'll talk about Harry's early life, his brush with death, and then his life-changing meeting with Caresse, and then scandal, escape to Paris, the Crosbys in Paris, his publishing Harry's poetry, and then his obsession with death, the son, and his final tragic act, which probably has something to do why he's such a hidden secret, and his work is really, until recently, was virtually unfindable. So we can go to the next one. As I said, he was born in the Back Bay, and if you see here, yesterday I rode my blue bike. 95. He was born in the Back Bay. He lived at 95 Beacon Street. His uncle was J.P. Morgan. He was a direct descendant of Alexander Hamilton, and his ancestors were the Van Rensselaers, which the Grews and the Morgans, and his middle name was Harry Grew. Crosby, he changed it to Sturgis. I don't know why, but he comes from very, very rich pedigree, and he was a Boston Brahmin and a blue blood. And it's interesting, that corner of the public garden is really cool because there's this statue. It's called the Angel of the Waters. It's for this philanthropist, George White, and he had given $5 million to charity. But this whole corner has a weird vibe. If you're ever driving down past Cheers, it's on the right-hand side, and the house is still there. So Harry had a very idyllic life here. His parents moved here because there was a dance floor that could handle 150 people. So they probably had some wild parties there. Harry was a kind of a prankster. He was also a good kid. He had a sister that was 3 years younger than him, and they had a butler. They had a chauffeur. They had the whole works. Harry would stand up on that little veranda there and drop water balloons on his butler, and it was actually it's still a pretty cool place. If you're ever down that way, check it out. I ride by it a lot, and there's a really interesting vibration that comes from there. But he spent summers here, as was alluded to earlier, and his family's home was in Manchester, and this is a picture of the apple trees estate. It took a while for me to find it. I knew about Harry for a while. Me and my friend Garrett Lansing, who's a poet, and past a couple of years, we every Saturday, and we realized where it was, and I'll show you the video later. We actually walked the grounds, and very important to Harry, because even in the midst of him going to Paris and hating Boston and writing these rants, you'll hear one of them later, he always had fond memories for Apple Trees Estate, for Coffin Beach in Gloucester, for Tux Point, for Singing Beach, and the Myopia Club. In fact, he also had many dalliances and would check into hotels under an assumed name, and he would either go by Harry Crane for Crane Beach or the Count and Countess Myopia. His family was a member of Myopia Club, and later on he became owner of horses in Paris, and he was a very big horse race guy, and it probably goes back to his love of myopia and going there on Sundays and watching the polo. Now, he first met Caresse at a charity event in Beverly Farms on the 4th of July. And I'll get into that a little later. She chaperoned him. She was 8 years older than him. He'd come back from the war. I'll talk a little bit about that. And they went to Nantasket Beach, which at the time was like a Wildwood, New Jersey, a big amusement park. And within hours, he was professing her love for her in the Tunnel of Love, which is kind of wild. The entire North Shore was important to him, and it always was a source of fond memories, as I said. When he hated Boston, he always had a soft spot for here. And he had a very privileged childhood. He attended Noble and Greenough and St. Mark's. And St. Mark's to him was like a prison. He was a prankster. But his father was very, very strict. He was a banker and an heir, and he wanted Harry to be, I think his dad was a rugby player. He wanted Harry to be like him, but Harry was not, he wasn't your typical athlete, but he was a great, great runner. And he really hated St. Mark's. And from there, in 1917, around here, when World War I hit, it became almost like a status symbol to go to war. And he decided to join the American Ambulance Service, or the American Field Service Ambulance Corps. And I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. So Harry goes to war, and he's driving ambulance, and in Verdun. In fact, I'll read a little bit from my friend's intro. It's really great. But in Verdun, he's driving the ambulance. His friend Spud is right next to him, and he's hit by a shell. And he ducked at the last minute, and it was almost like a Three Stooges episode. All that was left was the steering wheel and the seat, and everything else was decimated. Somehow, he survived that, and his friend Spud was killed. Within the year, there was another battle where he actually carried over 2,000 bodies and body parts and live people to ambulances. And from that, he was awarded the French Medal of Honor with the Gueux de War, I think it's called, and the Croix de Guerre, and the youngest person ever to receive that medal. And it's this cross right there. And he became obsessed with crosses, although he was raised Episcopalian, but he became very obsessed with crosses, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm going to read a little piece of this for you so you can see some of the horrors that he suffered and that he witnessed, and that I think caused him. I think today he would have been PTSD, and I think a lot of his actions from his sexual mania and his obsession with death came directly from his experiences at war. So let me just read you this. My friend Ben, if you have a chance, this book came out 3 years ago, and it's really, really great because his poetry was not available. And it's Harry's selected poems, right there, thank you, and edited by Ben Mazer, who did a really great job. Harry Crosby was born in Back Bay, Boston on June 4th, the son of heir of wealthy banking family. His mother's brother was J. Pierpont Morgan. His father was a direct descendant of Alexander Hamilton. At St. Mark's, the prescribed preparation for Harvard, Harry was a bit of a prankster and excelled at track, but was mostly seen as a loner. Upon graduation in 1916, he enlisted in the American Ambulance Corps, and by late June was in France. Soon, he experienced heavy battle conditions at Verdun and saw a gore that would impress him for life. He carried buckets of limbs. He wrote home, "I saw the most gruesome sight I've ever seen. Lying on a blood-stained brancard was a man, not older than 20. I afterwards ascertained, suffering the agonies of hell. His whole right cheek was completely shot away, so you could see all the insides of his face. He had no jaws, teeth, or lips left. His nose was plastered in. Blood was streaming all over. Then a shell exploded 10 yards away from him, and he miraculously escaped being killed by jumping to the floor of his ambulance. He wrote his parents that on that day he had turned from a boy into a man. Somehow he was no longer afraid of death." And when he returned, he was awarded the cross. So I think I alluded to a little bit. He comes back and he's shattered, and two things that he never did. Although the first picture, he never wore a hat, and they wore hats back then. He issued hats, And he was developing this real hate of Boston. He called Boston filled with virgins with flat shoes. And he just, after going and seeing what he did and experiencing what he did, he was developing this resentment for Boston. And he meets Caresse. So Caresse is married to Richard Peabody, who was also fought in the war, but became a heavy drinker, and he was obsessed with fires. So he had a fire alarm directly connected to the firehouse in his house. So if there was a fire, it would go off at 3 a.m, he would go and just watch fires. So it's kind of crazy because he watched fires, and Harry was a fire all unto himself. So when he met Caresse, she was married, she was 8 years older than him. He professes his love for her, and he tells her within weeks, they had relations within weeks, and he tells her, if you don't run away with me, I'll kill you, I'll kill myself, and I'll take the blame for it. I mean, and he just hounds her finally she acquiesces, and the society in Back Bay and the parents decide what he does originally is he gets a job at Shawmut Bank, and he's working there as a banker. So he's a banker, and through his uncle, he got that job, and his parents decide that we better remove him from the situation because the scandal was, today, no big deal, but back then, and plus, the trappings of the blue blood Brahmin, and the privilege, but the trappings of it is what he railed against, and this scandal really blew up everything, and he never looked back. I think he really, what Caresse said, it's like we were isolated, we were, we were vilified, but we stood our ground, and people finally came around to us. But they were really pariahs. And so he goes to Paris, and he gets a job with J.P. Morgan's bank in Paris. She comes over, and she lives with him, but he immediately has an affair, and she goes back to America. But while they were together, he would take a boat down the Seine to work every day. She would row in a cut-off top, and she was very well endowed. They'd be whistling at her. She would drop him off and take him back, or take the boat back, and then all Paris would be watching her. A major event happens. He does not write poetry. Before he went to Paris, he went to Harvard. Completely non-distinguishable career. He studied French because he knew French like the back of his hand, but the only thing that his dad was concerned with was getting into this supper club that his dad had been in, the AD club, and it took him 4 or 5 times to get into it. He finally got into it even after he left, but he finally got into the AD club, and that really is the only distinguishing thing. He didn't take too many. He wasn't writing then. He wasn't taking any English classes. He probably took some, but mostly French. And his Harvard career was really kind of undistinguished. So he's in Paris, and then at this point, he also is obsessed with death. Some people say that the 8 years that he wrote was just an 8-year suicide note. Some of the poems are so chaotic and so, if it was written by somebody who wasn't a poet, you probably would call the police and say, this guy's going to kill someone or kill himself. But poetry itself can kill, but it's the greatest force on earth, as Gabe knows. And it saved him, I think, because he doesn't know what he's going to do. But a major event was his uncle Walter Berry was a man about town. He was he owned over 8,000 books. Edith Wharton was a suitor and wanted to marry him. And he really took Harry under his wing. What he did was he told Harry, look, quit the job at the bank, screw it, become a writer, that's what you want to do. He becomes obsessed with the symbolists, with the, I'll read that in a second. And he starts a long, deranged, or long, intentful education. He's an autodidact, and he decides that he's going to teach himself. And the first thing he grabs onto is Rimbaud, and onto Oscar Wilde, and he just well, actually I'll read this little piece for you. But what happens is Walter Berry leaves him all his books, And they're rare, and Edith Wharton got about 100 of them. She was very angry about it, and she hated Harry for it. But then what he would do, he would go around Paris, and he would give them to people in the streets, or he would go into a bookstore, and he would put like 10 cents, and he would leave it there, or these are $1,000 books. So he loved books. I think Archibald MacLeish said he drowned himself in literature, but he also was careless and eccentric as they come. So, but let me give you an idea of a self-education, because it's pretty amazing. There was Harry's self-education as a poet. He was enamored of the symbolists and the decadents. His favorite poet was Rimbaud, Baudelaire, T.S. Eliot, E. A. Cummings, and James Joyce. He read Wilde's A Picture of Dorian Gray 3 times, copying out long passages from its diary. Caresse taught him how to write sonnets in 1924, and by 1925 he had enough for a book, Sonnets for Caresse, which the couple had privately printed, laying the beginnings of the Black Sun Press. It wasn't until the publication of Harry's second book, Red Skeletons, in 1927, that Harry and Caresse were to assume a name as a publishing house, Editions Narcisse, and working for the first time with the printer, Roger Lescarret, who were to direct the design of their books. It was here that they first showed a flair for choice types, adequate margins, fine papers, interesting bindings, and innovative design, printed in tiny editions, often numbered in purple pencil. Red Skeletons fits this model. So what they do, they decide to start their own press. And, I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. Publishing and poetry. Can I read that? Together they published exclusive limited quantities of meticulously produced hand-manufactured books. It started out as a vanity press. There was a book of Caresse's called, I think, Sonnets for... Was it Sonnets? And 2 books by Harry. 5 books, including 2 by Harry, Sonnets for Caresse, and 1 by Caresse herself, called Crosses of Gold, were published under the name Editions Narcisse. It was not Black Sun yet. Here's a story. This is a picture of Caresse with their dog. They had 2 dogs. Narcisse was the fastest dog in all of France, documented. He was a race dog, and the press was named after him. The other dog was named Clitoris with a Y, and they wanted to name the press Clitoris, but for obvious reasons they didn't, so they named their second dog that. And Caresse's daughter asked what was Clitoris, and said it was a Greek god, so, or Clitoris, maybe it was Clitoris, that was pronounced. So, but they make the transition and they begin publishing friends of Harry. Harry becomes friends with Hemingway. He runs with the Bulls, and he's very, very eccentric. In fact, the other thing he does start a long and intentful derangement of his senses under Rimbaud. He discovers opium when he goes to Egypt. He has affairs. They have an open relationship, but they have affairs with many, many women, and he's very, very intentful about it. He doesn't hide it. And the other thing he does as he has these affairs is that he gives different names to each of the mistresses that he has. He's got the Lady of the Golden Horse, and he's got the Fire Princess, and he's got the woman with diamond eyes. And Caresse knows about this, and Caresse has her own affairs, but it ultimately will cause some issue when the final tragic act occurs. Let me tell you some more about the books. Oh, you know, I can read it. So, as far as what was his poetry like, so 2 marks of the true poet are singularity and authenticity. Spending whole days doing nothing but reading, turning out poem after poem in wild outbursts of energy, and laboring for hours over the revision of his work, Crosby had both. He had the singularity of a voice that sounds like no other. There's an eleiotic significance, a metaphysical fusion of the senses with the intellect, a sense of cutting seriousness infusing the poetry. There was the authenticity of one who means, as a matter of life or death, every word that he writes. When these 2 marks are fused, work comes violently to life, incomprehensible but compelling, something each reader might interpret or experience differently. Although Crosby's early work in Sonnets for Caresse and Red Skeletons was contrived and derivative, apprentice work, the poems he wrote in the last 2 years of his life, 1928 to 1929, the years of perhaps psychotic division of allegiances between Caresse Crosby and Josephine Noyes Roch were marked by a maturity of expression, an ability to fuse the elements of poetry. Looking at the poems alone, apart from the legendary biography, may be a reason to find more in them than was found during the years of the publication. Besides Harry's poetry, it was also the list and the poets and the writers that they published that brought fame to them. And let me just give you it's up on the board there, but it's so tiny. Let me read this to you. The Black Sun Press rose to fame. It was also the list. I'm sorry. So they had this printer, and all he did before they met him was he did wedding announcements and he did funeral announcements. And they get this guy, and they make the most beautiful books. The first one was, I think, called the Hindu-India Journal, 28 copies, and all done by hand, all done with the most meticulous, no expense spared, gilded bindings, Japanese vellum paper. And these are beautiful. And I don't know, does anyone in this room own or ever seen a Black Sun Press book? I have. They're in the Athenaeum, but one of the things that shot Harry in the foot and Caresse was that they were one of the premier publishers of some of the greatest avant-garde writers of the 20th century. The books cannot be found anywhere, so nobody knows. You know, when you say Black Sun Press, they think it's Black Sparrow or whatever. So, really, it's. I think they were so exclusive and so beautiful that they shot themselves in the foot. Plus, what happened at the end, and Harry bringing shame to his family, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But let me tell you about the list. Among the books published by Black Sun Press were Sun by D.H. Lawrence, and Gabe and I were talking earlier, the owner, or this church was built by Susan Elizabeth Corral, and for her brother who was a panhandler. He discovered gold in Colorado and was killed. And for the D.H. Lawrence book, I think it was The Escaped Cock, he also, he was paid 50 gold pieces by Harry. And Harry had the means. I mean, in Paris, they had a chauffeur, 2 maids, and he lived on $12,000 a year, but he would send these telegrams to his father and say, the famous one was in 1927, said, please sell $10,000 worth of stock. We've decided to live a mad, extravagant life. Well, they already were, but he sent a couple of those, and he got the money. The interesting thing about his parents, they were shocked and they were horrified, and he hated Boston, but they really stood by him all the way. The dad said some horrible things. He said, when he decided to be a poet, his dad said, you're going to be a poet, everyone's going to laugh at you. You're such a failure. And when your dad says shit like that to you, it really hits you. But he never lost his relationship with his dad. His dad was completely disappointed. He was a real Harvard man and a rugby player. But his mom really had a soft spot for him. I'll talk a little bit about the night that he died. He really, his mom and Hart Crane were waiting to meet him for dinner, and his mom was like, and Caresse, he's never late like this, so they knew something was wrong because he had a relationship, and Caresse too. They had some problems, but they stayed together, and whatever that bond was, it was real. So, short stories by Kay Boyle, Tales Told of Shem and Sean by James Joyce. 3 episodes in what was then known as Work in Progress, and the first selection from Work in Progress to appear in book form, which ultimately became Finnegan's Wake. Einstein by Archibald MacLeish. The Escaped Cock, which I mentioned he got paid 50 gold coins for. The Bridge by Hart Crane. Not only did he publish The Bridge, but Hart Crane was having some issues. They bought this mill called Moulin du Soleil, and they had drunken donkey races. Picasso came, Brancusi, all these people would come, and not only did Hart Crane write the Cape Hatteras section of the bridge there, he got in some trouble. He had relations with a bunch of sailors, and then he went into a bar and he got in a fight with the waiter, and Harry bailed him out, and he paid for the money for him to go back to America and finish the bridge. And the very first publication of the bridge before the Otto Kahn 1933 version is Black Sun, but no one sees it. But if you want to see the books, go to the Athenaeum, and maybe I'll go with you. What was that? Oh, okay, yeah. I'm not a member, so if you guys are a member of the Athenaeum. So the bridge by Hart Crane, and by the way, the photographs by Walker Evans, which is really cool too. And Walker Evans was also at the dinner. Imaginary Letters by Ezra Pound. An artist. I have a picture of the last, also, I'm going to show you suggested reading. Alistair was this Gothic artist who did this great illustration for Harry's Red Skeletons. And Marie Laurencin, Max Ernst, Polio Chentov, Paul-Emile Bicard, Walker Evans, Caresse Crosby, and even D.H. Lawrence contributed illustrations and designs to Black Sun Press books in the years 1928 to 31. The height of Crosby's experience with Black Sun was working with James Joyce on the numerous successive proofs to which Joyce subjected his text and the Crosbys during the course of preparing Tales Told of Shem and Sean for publication. Harry, to whom Joyce was a god, was buoyant at the experience of hearing Joyce explain all the changes and additions he was making to the text. Caresse went to see Picasso to ask him for a frontispiece portrait of Joyce for the book. Picasso declined on the grounds that he never did commissioned work. Besides, he wasn't interested in Joyce. Brancusi wound up creating the frontispiece, a portrait of Joyce in zigzag lines. Joyce didn't care for it, but it's pretty well known now. So, so let me tell you a couple stories here. So, a couple things about Harry. This is him and his sister Kitsa, who was younger, and Caresse. While he's publishing and while he's writing poetry, and he's also writing this. If you get it, I'll talk about this later. But this is his diary. So he's writing a diary. He's producing all this, and he's partying his head off. I mean, in ways that would boggle the mind. I mean, here he is. It's called the Four Arts Ball. They had it every year. French students with an unidentified woman. What he would do. For one, he was covered in red ochre. He had 4 dead pigeons around his neck, and that was the costume he wore. And Caresse came into the party on a baby elephant with a pink wig. I mean, it's some crazy shit. And all right, so and then, but the other thing, all right, so a couple things about Harry besides some of the guys as I mentioned. Caresse had an affair with Henry Cartier-Bresson. And this is an early photograph untitled by Harry, and supposedly that he influenced Bresson and to give up art and go back to photography, or that they're very, very close as far as art goes. And there's a whole bunch of Harry photographs which are just beautiful, As I said, he had a lot of lovers, but this is crazy. He bought this in France. It's called Valkula. It's Anders van Zorn did it. If you look at it, there's nothing really that spectacular about it. But of all the mistresses he had, Caresse said she was most jealous of this sketch. And it's crazy. He bought it. He would go out in Paris and he would sit at the table and have a conversation with Jacqueline, totally, in the air as she sat on the wall. But no, she wasn't there. It was just he would sit there by himself and literally be talking to her. So this print, when he died, was left $5,000. He left her in the will, and she doesn't exist. But it was also he also left the drawing to the Harvard Fogg Museum. So my brother and I, about 15 years ago, went down there to find it, and you can just go. And you write the number down, they pull it out, and you stand there looking at it. And it was really quite amazing to be looking at it. But you realize that it's like a woman with no shoes on, with a walking stick, sitting on a log. But I'll show you later the eyes. I think Harry saw himself in her. I really do. And there's a painting that I'll show you later that was so disturbing to Caresse when he died that she had it destroyed, because he's got these eyes that are just piercing. And he was the eternal child, but and he hated kids. Caresse had 2 kids, and as soon as they got married, banished them to Swiss boarding schools. But with the daughter, he really had a really interesting relationship with. This is him. Another thing that really was a benchmark in his life was seeing Lindbergh land. Within months, he takes lessons. there wasn't even a name for the airplane then. He takes lessons, and he gets really impatient. 2 months before he died, he flew solo. So he was also a photographer. He was a pilot, and he loved sketches of Jacqueline, and he believed that she was real. So let me read a couple things about his eccentricities, because his love and his sexual mania, and was, as I said, he was a very gentle person, but it did get in some dark places, because him and Caresse at the time, he would be Me Too'd to death today, because he had sex with underage, not in any sort of way other. I mean, he was very, very upfront about it. But back then, it was different times. He had sex with a girl named Zora, who was a Berber dancer, a Moroccan dancer. He had sex with a 13-year-old Berber boy. So but he wasn't gay, and he did have. I mean, most of his relations were with either friends of Caresse's or women. But he did have some dark appetites. Opium. He smoked a lot of opium. Let me just read this to you. By late 1922, his friends were obliged to take him or leave him as an eccentric, someone who refused to be squeezed by rules, and many of them even believed he had married Polly for no other reason than to spite them and their conventions. He hated holidays because they were arbitrary periods of freedom, which were given rather than taken, and because they were occasions for artificial merriment. He was an authentic dandy. He never let Polly wear false pearls. He wouldn't wear false anythings. He dressed impeccably, always in black, shaved scrupulously every morning, was repelled by the touch of strangers. He found it disheartening to consider the ugly bodies that have washed in one's bathtub, to imagine the people who have been born or have made love or have died in one's bed. It was like him to prefer the celebration of a corpse to the christening of a child. Death focused his bravery and his carelessness. He sought the society of people who were exacting, especially the society of exacting women, because he found them rich in secrets. Harry enjoyed secrets. When I like people immensely, I never tell their names to anyone. It's like murdering a part of them. He prized discretion highly and was never happier than when people congratulated him for his taciturnity. He would not abandon his flirtations and love affairs even at the very beginning of his marriage, but he hid them from Polly. He, quote, "You only upset yourself by your sins, but you upset other people by your confessions." He wrote in his notebook, not by way of rationalization. He never troubled to rationalize or explain, but as a legitimate article of his belief. And I would say that if there's one thing, Harry was a poet and a man of a pure belief. And the one thing he believed in that was in the union of two people in death was the highest form of union. And so when he met Caresse, they'd already had a plan. He was going to, on Halloween, I think in 1932, they were going to kill themselves, and then they were to direct somebody to fly a plane over New York City and spread their ashes. And Caresse knew about it, and they had the pact in their pockets, walked around and had it all the time. His poems really, as I said earlier, really reflect that. The one thing that he did in his travels, he went to Egypt and he became obsessed with the sun god Ra. And that's one thing I haven't talked about yet, but I will now. He became obsessed with the sun, and his poems are so repetitively sun-oriented. It was the source of light, of heat, of the source of everything. It's a source of destruction, and he saw it as a symbol, a symbol that really, he became a sun worshiper in the most pure sense of the word. And a lot of his poems are repetitive. He starts out as a decadent and writes these poems that are kind of like very Rimbaldian, and then he writes these really great prose poems that are really lean. And so he changes styles, but there's a chaos and there's a beauty to it. But then when he becomes obsessed with the sun, you'll see in the video I show you, he just, all his poems are sun-centered, and he really becomes obsessed with the sun. I was telling you earlier, here's the picture. You can't really see it that well, sorry, but if you look at it, you see the eyes, and it's very similar to Jacqueline. You see where how it would spook Caresse to the point of wanting to destroy it. So there's that. The one thing I want to mention then, his obsession with death and the sun, we talked about that, but his final tragic act. He, in Venice, while shopping for her marriage trousseau, she's about to get married, he meets this 20-year-old Jacqueline Roch. Oh, and he meets her and has an affair with her, and she's like no woman he's ever met. She's called the Fire Princess, and she is every bit, as fiery as Harry. So they meet, and they write back and forth. He comes back to the States. He's going to go to the Harvard-Yale game. They go to Detroit for 7 days and just have a full-on sex Olympics. He under the assumed name Harry Crane, comes back, and there's a big party for Hart Crane in the bridge. There's also 2 days later, there's a party, there's dinner with J.P. Morgan, with Hart Crane, and with his mother. He doesn't show up. He has a friend who lives in the Upper West Side, who has an apartment, which is like his little hidden his love shack. So him and Jacqueline go, and the last thing that let me tell you. But the last thing, she writes a poem, says, "Death is our marriage," and says yes. And so, not to blame the victim. Once again, the mystery remains. Was she a victim? What happened was, she was shot in the head. He was shot in the head. They were laying there fully clothed. He had his shoes off. He had his nails painted red ochre. He had a tattoo of a cross on one foot and a tattoo of the sun on the other one. He had his arm around her. The coroner had decided that he died 2 hours after her. Whether he shot her and shot himself, that we'll never know. There was no suicide note, so the mystery of Harry and Josephine, obviously, the scandal that caused, it was in the papers, and it was everywhere. They tried to look for a psychological cause. So it was saying poetry killed, it drove him to it, because when he looked at his poems, that oh wow, obviously, poetry and love, but he really believed 100% that in death they would have their ultimate union, However, it was supposed to be with Caresse. Whether this girl goaded him or said, "I dare you," or whatever happened, we'll never know. So because of that, not because of that, but what happened subsequently, Caresse was shattered. She changes some of his diaries and takes the Fire Princess out, and she's wrecked. She goes on. Well, a couple things about Caresse. She goes on. Well, I wanted to tell you this earlier, but I just remembered I forgot it. Was Caresse is going to a ball in Boston, and she's got this wireframe armor thing on, and she's like, "Oh, this thing sucks." So she takes 2 handkerchiefs and she sews them together, and she puts a strap on them, and she invents the bra. So she invents the bra. She has a sweatshop down on Washington Street, right? And she's got 2 people working for her making the bra, and she invented the bra. She was a direct descendant of Robert Fulton, the inventor of the steamship, and so she has these 2 people working for her, and she gets tired of it and sells it to the Maidenform and becomes the bra. So she invented the bra and sold the patent for it for like $1,500. So she was an amazing person. So she goes on after that, and she becomes she still publishes under the Black Sun moniker. She lived with an American guy in Virginia, but she ended up buying a castle in Rome, and Henry Miller and Aeneas Nin, and met her and would hang out with her, and supposedly started writing their erotica with Caresse. Caresse publishes Charles Olson, which is a good connection to here, in 1950. Y and X, is that what it is, Gabe? Y and Z? And she keeps publishing, and she becomes a peace activist against the war. And she really, but the other thing she does, which is really cool, is that she's living in Italy, and she actually goes to the Spoleto Festival in 1965, which is the World Poetry, where Ezra Pound went with Olga Rudge. John Wieners was there, Bill Bergson was there, but Olson and Caresse were there. So you can tie Olson back to Carrie, you can tie Kerouac back to Carrie. There's another book called Exile's Return, which is where I first heard of it through my friend Garrett. He said, read this book because there's 2 chapters on Harry in there. And Malcolm Cowley was the editor for Jack Kerouac's On the Road, and he's the one who really pushed for it to be published. So Malcolm Cowley, and that book is really amazing. He was in Paris with Harry, and if that book wasn't written, he probably wouldn't know anything. But then, that's the final tragic act, and that's, I think, one reason why he's been muted and been kind of like plus, he loves secrets. He was a secret, and there was the Black Sun itself is like this secret circle, and once you find out, like, people are like, how did I not know about this guy? Well, maybe it's part of Harry's magic, You find out when you should find out. But since then, his influence, a couple years ago, I'll show you a couple videos. One is me and Fannie Howe, which is a great poet. Finally, a poet and publisher comes up with this book, and he really meticulously put together as much of his poetry as he could. I think there was a small edition that came out like 20 years ago that wasn't really well put together. But Southern Illinois had all his poems, so the only way to get there was online. It was really, so nobody knew. Jerome Rothenberg, who just died recently, he did a couple anthologies that were really well known. He had Revolution of the Word in 1974, and he includes Harry. My friend Garrett and Thorpe Fite in around the same time, they publish this magazine with John Wieners and Garrett and Harry Crosby. So there were these little bumps here and there, but it was only people in the know. This book comes out 4 years ago. Honestly, a lot of great poets were involved with this book and the book launch. And I really thought this was going to say, oh, now Harry's going to be a household name, but he should be. But go out and buy this book. As I said, Ben's introduction's great. I just borrowed from it. And the poems are really amazing. In fact, what I'll do is, why don't we show the video, and then I'll think about what else. I know you guys are probably getting tired of hearing me talk, so. And then we'll take some questions, I guess. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Harry Crosby is back, just when I received a book of poems by John Wieners from Mr. Dewhurst, and for which I am most grateful. And I find it prophetic as I stand here with Jim Dunn in the shadow of the apple trees at Manchester by the Sea, where Harry Crosby played as a child, and where he was so rich and protected, he developed an aristocratic manner particular to New England, both proud and alcoholic and intelligent but reticent. His father wanted him to be mighty and manly and ordered him over to World War I, where Harry was almost annihilated by a bomb. He saved others and himself, but was utterly changed. A man for whom the sun rose wherever he looked. He lived wildly, but no one got mad. His mother and he continued to love each other throughout his terrifying life. She forgave him his sins. He must have been something to have so few enemies. I've known Brahmins since I was very young, one from here on the North Shore of Boston, whom I loved forever, and one who loathed himself for being so beautiful. It was a curse. Harry was a philanderer and devoted to his wife. He was a publisher, poet, and diarist. He lived in Paris and took his own life in New York. The suicide was double. He was second. The Boston girl looked like his twin. What did he think during the 2 hours between her and his suicide? A kind of nobility in keeping a promise like that. John Wieners was also an aristocrat, polite and cracked. Thought a lot about Harry, and he wrote these lines. I speak of suicides, men dropped at tide. I speak of sleeping pills that still are aching mind. I speak of lovers they murdered because they are so kind. Anything to stay beautiful and remain blind.
Hart Crane, Harry Crosby, I see you going over the edge. Hart Crane, Harry Crosby, I see you going down. What does it feel like to fall over the end, to know that you're going down and you're not coming up? Ah, Hart Crane, Harry Crosby, don't run out on me. Stay with me, men. Build up my shoulder blades. Let me carry what you threw away. Come on, men. Give me the insides of your souls. I mean, one can only cry so much. Hart Crane, Harry Crosby, I know you guys live like I do, crawling around on dirty sheets, hoping nobody knocks on your door, and all the time he is knocking, beating. Give me the beautiful thing, squeeze it out, pick it out of your hair. Tell the old women under the tin roofs that life can be better, that love is the only value when the bombs break their tulips, when the shells kill their lovers. Come on, Harry, give a little. Help us. We don't want to die. I don't want to jump out of the Ritz Tower. Get us away from ourselves. Bring us back to Babyland. Or if only we could go to sleep, Harry, or to bed. Oh, wipe the silver tears away. Fly the red flag of fire in our hearts, Harry. I'll tell you one last thing, that this is the agony you saw coming down from your New York hotel. This is what made you jump. City of swan boats, city of frog ponds, you are an abomination, a perpetual sore, a target for disgust. And in the name of the sun and the moon and the stars, and in the name of Mad Queen, I curse you, Boston, city of hypocrisy. O trill and Eur an und Iran unt in Nuan on Menin. I shall be waiting for you when you are ready to come.
This is what 5 pounds of body fat
That's right. That's what 5 pounds of body fat looks like. So put that. A couple things. John Wiener's poem is how I came to Harry. And John, in the 50s, obviously, the difference between John and Harry was class. Harry had, tons of money behind him, and John was a middle-class guy from Milton, although Milton's really nice now. But the other thing he got wrong, he assumes that Harry jumped from the Ritz, and he doesn't mention Caresse at all, so it's interesting, John's take on it. Hart Crane, as you know, or maybe you don't know, he died within 2 years, jumped off the Orizaba, a liner, ocean liner. And the funny thing about it is that Hart Crane's dad invented the lifesavers, and if they would have thrown him on, he would have lived. It's interesting. The other thing that I want to mention, and I'll be quick, you saw the dog, which was the fastest dog in France, and also was the namesake of Editions Narcisse. That was a sculpture of the dog that is in the MFA. I don't know if there's yeah. So Catherine Lane Weems' estate, which was in the video. Me and Fanny went down there and out on Dana Point, and since we were poets, we thought we had entitlement. So we just drove there, and the place is breathtaking. And we drove up, and the only way we get out of there was go around the circle. And the woman comes out and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, we're poets, and we're Harry Crosby, and the fastest dog in France." And she's like, "Well, you can't just come up to my house." She's like, "Why didn't you call first?" And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I left. I don't even who made a call?" So that one picture was her house, and she lived a couple of miles, and they must have known each other fairly well, So I wanted to mention her. Here's some quotes. I don't think I'm going to read them, but T.S. Eliot some stuff, and so did Archibald MacLeish said, "Never met anyone who was so imbued with literature he was drowned in it." And Ezra Pound said that his final act was a vote of confidence in the cosmos, because really Harry believed, and Ezra saw that. So I won't read these. I think I've done enough talking. Oh, further reading. So I have Ben's book, which is essential, and this is harder to find, the Shadows of the Sun, but it's really essential because this is really day to day, and a lot of mentions of a lot of North Shore places. And if you go down the street to Manchester by the Book, they usually have a couple copies of this, and it's really great. Jeffrey Wolfe, Tobias Wolfe's brother, wrote this in the 70s, and it really is he focuses a little too much on Harry's eccentricities, but he really captures a lot. The poetry wasn't as available, so there's not a lot of poetry, but there's a lot about his life, which was really Harry's greatest work of art, you know. Exile's Return by Malcolm Cowley, the Jeffrey Wolfe book, The Shadows of the Sun, selected poems, and then Seeing with Eyes Closed. There's also a book that came out of all his prose poems that John Lombardo put out, which is really a great book. I just couldn't find it in my attic. And The Passionate Years, which Gabe had lent me, Caresse, she kind of gets some things wrong, and she purposely, but it's good to read what her perspective was. And if there's any other books, I think that's about it. I think Hart Crane might have wrote something about Harry too. So I think that's it. I'll stop talking now. But I'll take questions if you guys want to ask me anything. Thank you. Anyone? Bueller? Yeah. Kate.
Still a mystery whether his mistress killed herself.
Yeah.
Or he killed her.
Yes. Yes, that's a mystery. They found them together. There was no note, but from their correspondences before leading up to that point, it looked like he didn't want to meet her. He wanted to, and she kept saying, you know, she pushed him to meet. But that doesn't mean that she killed himself. But she knew about the pact, but the mystery remains. She did die 2 hours before him, so she died first. So the chance of him shooting her and shooting himself are greater than the other way around, you know, because obviously, yeah, Bing.
Yeah, from the little I've read, there's also a report that someone who knew Harry spotted him in the lobby of the hotel, and they think it's this Harry's ghost or something walking around in the 2 hours before.
That's true, but they also think that he might have come down, and you know, it might have been him because there was 2 hours before he. I don't know how they determined that. The coroner determined that. Then there was a whole. You know, it was in the New York Post. You know, poet kills himself, and you know, they blame poetry and love. You know, which is probably the culprit. Anybody else? Has anybody? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say the sculpture of the dog.
Yeah.
Catherine Weems writes in her autobiography that she saw Harry and Narcisse Noir running down Singing Beach.
Oh, really?
And she knew him from growing up here. They grew up as kids summering here, and they knew each other from the Back Bay. So she went up to Harry and said, Harry, I would love to sculpt your dog. Can you bring it by my house? And he turned to her and he said, you and your little animals, why don't you carve something more macabre?
Oh, really? But then he said yes, right? Obviously, right? Yeah.
Yes, and it ended up being, she won first prize for that, and it was the first professional piece that she sold.
Oh, wow. And I don't think,
where it exists now.
but I don't think it's on display. I think they got it in
it's
dry dock. Yeah, bummer. Because I went down to look for it, but I did find the Jacqueline though. But that's a great story. That's a good point though. Does anybody else have any direct stories about either Harry or his time up here? Because I have a feeling that he might have been here. Oh, go ahead, Fred.
You might want to mention about how he named Polly.
Yes, I did want to name. Yes.
And how he made a cross.
Yeah. So I said he was really into crosses, and I had a picture. Thanks, Fred. And it was acrostic. Her original name was Polly Jean Jacobs, and what he did, they decided, as I said, it wasn't clitoris, but Harry going down and Caresse going across because of the acrostic that it made and the cross it made. That's why they chose that name. And Fred can probably talk a little bit about the influence. Genesis George from Psychic TV was so influenced by Harry that he named his daughter Caresse, right, Fred? Yeah.
Before that, they used the title In the Shadows of the Sun for a Derek Drahman film.
Yes.
So Derek used that. Martin Bristol did the soundtrack. Jen had a kid called her Caresse. John Gosling, one of the members of Psychic TV, had a son. He called him Harry.
Oh.
I met Jen in Boston in 1984 and didn't know who Harry Crosby was. And I discovered through these guys from London who came over and they were in Boston. They went to his house, they did a tour.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
And so they taught me a little bit about Boston and it carried over to England. And
And there's also these bands like Coil also, I think they've done a bunch of songs, and he's very influential.
Very inspirational to a certain subgenre of industrial music.
Yes.
You know, maybe this scandal was so big that there was another guy named Harry Crosby. He changed his name to
Bing. Yes, Bing, he did. No, Nathaniel, that's not Minute Maid lemonade. Whatever the hell he did, commercial. But it's just amazing to know that up until 1917 to 1922, he was here, and every summer he'd walk from the apple trees to Singing Beach, and really, that this place meant a lot to him. And even you heard the poem about Boston. He hated Boston, but he never said a bad word about this place. So, what year? I'm going to say, like, I can look, but I think it's like in the mid 70s or maybe late 75, maybe. What's that? Yeah. That really was the first thing, and maybe did those guys find the biography? How did they find him?
Through Black Sun.
Yeah.
That was like, when I looked in '84 for a copy, used copy, I thought there would be tons of copies.
Yeah.
And I found it in San Francisco.
Oh, really? Well, I know Mark, when I go in there, in fact, I have to stop the impulse to buy them and give them to people, because he usually has 2 or 3 copies for like $6 or $7, and it really is essential. Yeah.
That's where I got mine.
Oh, yeah, see, but for like $7, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
So.
there's also on YouTube, I forget who the interviewer is, a pretty famous interviewer. He interviewed Jeffrey Wolf in the 70s.
Oh, really?
Extensively.
Oh, cool.
And it's a fascinating interview.
Yeah, I don't think I ever saw that. That's really cool.
I'll find it and send it to you.
And Tobias Wolff wrote A Boy's Life. His brother wrote A Boy's Life. His brother was also a famous novelist, which was made into a movie with Robert De Niro, I think.
There is a good
Right.
film on YouTube of Caresse also, right before she died, that was done, a small documentary.
Oh, really? Oh, good.
I think in the 80s, early
Oh.
80s.
Oh, there you go. So there's stuff out there. Oh, you know what? Can I show I was going to read a poem, but this poet. Well, actually, I'll answer your question first, and then and we'll end with the video of Charles Bernstein. Yeah.
Just wondering if there was anything that you had as an opinion about his mental health, or if you're just reporting.
Yeah, I'm just reporting. Like, I don't think there was. Oh, hey. Yeah, hey. Hey, how are you? Good to- everything that I said was just, either what I read or what I.
But you don't have like an opinion that he was
Oh,
a dangerous man.
no, not dangerous. Well, I didn't read the part, but all his relations, that's a good point, because I want to say that a lot of people say the violent death and life of Harry Crosby. There was no violence about the man at all. We don't know if that was consensual, as I said before, so they definitely got together. He never forced anyone to do anything, and a lot of his trysts were so transparent, and he was a gentle spirit, so.
I'm really sorry, but this is very upsetting.
It is? Why?
Well, just our times that we're in.
Oh, yeah, it is
And
upsetting,
then we
yeah.
have politicians that act like this. And
Yeah.
they seem to be kind of poetically allowed
Yeah.
to lead things.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
just
true.
not that excited about how there's not really a negative about his.
Oh, there's negative stick around, but I mean, obviously he suffered after the fact. I mean, he's not known because of that, and he did do something that was horrible. Whether he cut himself and you can assume he might have done both, or they did it together. But yeah,
Elvis was similar.
yeah.
So, I mean, I appreciate that you're not having a biased opinion about his mental health.
No, not at all. Yeah, I am as best I can. I'm no. Yeah, then we're done. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah.
All of you for coming. One last thing before you go.
Oh, really cool,
If
man.
you'd like to apply for a grant from the Cultural Council in Manchester, please go to the portal that the Massachusetts Cultural Council extends, massachusettscultural.council.com. Look through the scroll and find Manchester by the Sea. Follow the prompts and make sure you fill it out, and we'll be happy to understand the things that are of interest to you, and we will fund and support you any way we can as a gift from the National Endowment and the state of Massachusetts. And Mr. Dunn.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.